It's been 12 years since I went to uni to study game development, and ever since then I've been employed as a full-time programmer, and for 8 years of that I've been a games programmer in games companies. So it might surprise you to hear that nobody's ever really asked me whether you should go to university to study game development. And it's a pretty complicated question, so I thought we might unpack that. I think the answer to this question is going to depend a lot on who you are and where you are. I've been lucky enough to grow up in Australia where we have really good financing for university studying. It's not that you don't have a debt in Australia when you study at university, it's just that the repayments don't hang over you and start immediately after you finish university here. And that's a pretty big advantage. Also, interest accumulates very slowly, only at the rate of indexation here. So we've got a really good deal. Not as good as the Scandinavians, but it works really well for us. Now, that's going to be a bit of a component in the answer of this question, because ultimately games is going to be one of the most competitive industries that you could hope to get into. And really, the longer after you finish university that you don't get a job, it's going to be harder for you. I'm primarily going to look at this from a software development side, only just as a computer programmer. I can comment a little bit on the art side only from the secondhand information that I have, speaking to other artists that went to university with me. And I'll comment a little bit on the design side as well. Back when I went to study game development in 2008, the game development industry was a very different place. Things like the Unity engine were completely in their infancy. Most game development studios still built their in-house engines with C++, and Unreal Engine as well was only still being used internally by Epic Games to produce things like, I think the newest one at the time would have been something like Unreal Tournament 3. So the way we were taught does differ a little bit from how you might get taught now if you were to attend Unity, if you were to attend university. In particular, you'll be studying things more along the lines of Unity and Unreal Engine, I would expect, probably briefly touching on C++, just for the sake of having some knowledge in case you were to go into that kind of company. But if you're living closer to big game companies or planning to move there for work, you might want to consider what that university teaches, because Unity skills will obviously not be looked at as fondly as skills like C++ at a company like Blizzard, because they're going to be working on proprietary engines and things like that. But one of the more interesting aspects about what I'm trying to say here is that when I went to university, there really weren't any other options for learning game development. Game development information would have a little bit been on the internet, but back then video wasn't as consumable on the internet as it is now. There wasn't any free game engines that you could use that weren't open source projects like Ogre 3D, or things that are just drastically smaller than things like Unreal Engine and Unity Engine that you have now. But these days, you're probably going to be coming across so many different places that you can go to learn really how to make games end to end, and that is a huge advantage over what anyone of my generation had. And I had a lot more than the generation before me, or the people who taught me. So nowadays, the differences really couldn't be more extreme than when I started. You can go on courses, you can go get courses online for easily probably under $20, even under $100 for really detailed courses on how to make games. So that does make the question very interesting. Should you go to university to learn how to make games? I would say the top thing that you need to bear in mind before you enter a games career at all is that A game development degree does not mean that you'll get a job. You need to be mindful of that going in and realize that if you are taking on a significant degree of financial risk in order to do it, nobody's going to hand you a game development job just because you did a university degree. Games doesn't particularly pay well as a career. You can find places where you will get paid well, but usually at the entry level, your wages are going to be quite low, and that's largely just because there is so much demand for a games job. Really, when you're entering, even for all the university study that you do, even if you're quite exceptional, there's still going to be a lot of people that know a lot more from just the many years of experience that they have actually building games. And so for the well-paying jobs, you're really competing with those people who have years of experience over you. And when you're putting yourself in a financial position where you're going to have a big loan hanging over your head, you really are going to be you're really in the worst negotiating position that you could be in for landing a games job. The next thing you need to know is making games just isn't as fun as playing games. So you might be passionate about playing games, and turns out there even are jobs about playing games these days. You can hop on Twitch, start becoming a personality and sharing your experience with other people. You don't need any special qualifications to enjoy playing games, and you in fact don't even need those qualifications to make games if what you want to do is just make really small games. So a question that I would tell you to ask yourself before you go in is, do you actually want to work at a big company? Do you want to do games as a career? Or do you just want to make your own thing, try things, experiment, learn, and create? Because that can be just as fun and more rewarding and far more cost effective than doing a whole degree, and time effective for that matter. It's not going to take you, 2 to 4 years to do that. So it's something that you should think about before you go sign up for a games course somewhere. Having said that, you might be thinking, well, maybe you want to do programming, but you don't know if you want to do games. Well, one thing that I would warn you is that learning software development in general is not necessarily going to prepare you to be good at game development. There's actually a lot of really specialized skills that you need to learn about 3D, the mathematics of 3D, and the systems that are involved in working inside a game engine. There's also just creative principles that you'll get through a game development course that you're not going to get if you go study a general software engineering type degree at a different university. Though that will prepare you in ways for other jobs, it will under-prepare you and actually make you not very competitive at all for any types of games jobs. So if you can, it is good to be treading sort of both grounds a little bit, but software for just software companies tends to depend a lot less on performance and a lot more on robustness, and you're going to learn how to do things that are really not relevant to games at all. And in games, you're really not going to learn things relevant to software engineering that much at all. Except if you're in one of these courses that are a bit closer to hybrids, where you're taking electives in both, with one foot in both fields. Something that I will say about that is, if you decide to go that route, you probably want to be careful about what that university is going to offer you, with the things I'm going to talk about, actually, the reasons why you might want to go to games university. So first I'll talk about the things that are good about games university or colleges, and then I'm going to talk about things that are bad about those. So what's good about games development university is you're going to meet a lot of like-minded people. I mean that not only as in they're going to have the same interests as you, but they will, and it's going to be amazingly easy to make friends. But at the same time, you're going to meet a lot of people that want to create things themselves. So when you're in those types of courses, you're going to make friends with a lot of people who become very talented at making 3D or 2D art that you could use in your games, or even audio. And if you're an artist, then you're going to meet people that can put the ideas into action. In other words, stitch the games together, and they'll be the programmers. And then somewhere in between there is design, which in my experience, this is going to sound quite biased and mean, but design was really the avenue that universities tended to take the students when they couldn't perform in either the 3D or the programming classes. It was just really a way of keeping them engaged as like a paying customer, while really not offering them very many career prospects at all. But one thing I will say about design is that it did prepare them with a lot of soft skills that could be useful to a game development type of thing. But overall, I felt like design was typically a disservice to the people studying it. Feel free to hate me in the comments for saying that, but I just wanted to be really blunt and straight up. If you're studying either art or programming at a game development college and they encourage you to go into the design SKU, I would really just consider just quitting altogether. I'll get to reasons why you may just actually want to leave. Another thing that's good about studying a game development course is that the university will be able to connect you with people who already do these jobs in companies that are reputable, and those people will be able to give you insights into the industry that you probably wouldn't be able to find yourself. So they may be long-term connections that might one day lead to paying work or full-time employment, or they might be just people who could give you insights into how the games industry works, maybe tell you about events that you don't know about, and point you in the right directions that might lead you towards a game development career. So that's something that you're probably not going to get yourself if you go a different direction and you buy courses online or you just study through YouTube and your own experience. Another good point about going to university is that your course is going to be structured for you. So if you try to study this at home or you try to study this with just courses online, what you won't get exposure to is, well, really they're things that you won't even know what you didn't know. So courses that teach soft skills or business skills at these game development universities, they'll be valuable to you depending on your age, depending on what you already know about, business or what exposure you have in your life to that type of thing. But these courses can be really helpful at giving you soft skills that are really transferable between roles, whether you go into software engineering or whether you go into something else. The other thing is that the course is going to give you deadlines. If you study yourself or if you try to work alone, you're not going to have deadlines, and so you'll need to be the type of personality that can hold yourself to a deadline. Not everyone can do that, but some people can, and if you're one of those people, you might consider whether you prefer to work independently and create deadlines for yourself, or whether you prefer to work collaboratively and work with other people. Obviously, if you want to collaborate, it's probably valuable to consider a course or to find avenues. It could be game development meetups, it could be things like Unity Collaborate, if they still do that. I didn't even check, but there are websites and resources that definitely Unity has made in the past and that are online for sure, that you can go meet other like-minded people that want to make games with you and that might be patient enough to put up with you learning as well while they're learning. So that's something that you should consider. You'll be forced to work in teams and to work collaboratively, which, even though that's going to be a painful experience in university, it's still a very useful and important skill for you to have. So that's one reason you might want to go. But trust me, that's going to suck, just like all group work. Except when you're getting paid, because when you're getting paid, everyone tends to do it. Another good reason to go to university is because you will be exposed to people that you can directly ask questions to. Now, obviously, there are better and worse facilitators for teaching you these types of things, but it's harder to sometimes get a good answer from the internet, just depending on the roll of the dice that you get from who's on the other end answering your questions. There's definitely places to go online to ask questions, but it's not as quick feedback loop necessarily. I'm not necessarily sure if it is better to go to university for that, but it's a thing. Universities sometimes and often have connections within the games industry, which they might be able to leverage to get you access to trying to work in one of these studios. This could be your first chance to get your foot in the door at one of these companies, and that's one reason that you might want to consider working at a university, especially one that has a good relationship with local game development companies. This is something that I would say probably shouldn't be underestimated. It's going to be more challenging to build credibility on your own if you don't have a university or something, or if you don't have any kind of degree or education that you can show to people. If you don't, you're probably going to need to show them a project to show that you are capable of doing the work. Another reason that you might want to consider doing this at university is that you might get a chance to meet the people that you could start a game development project with. You might make friends that are long-term contacts, or that you like well enough and create a group that you could go start your own little independent company or make your own little independent projects for either, the App Store or Steam, Epic Games Store, anything that you like. I've certainly known companies that were formed from student friendship groups that got together and just decided to continue making their own thing after university. To be fair, that's actually something that I kind of regret. Like, when I exited university, Unity existed, but I think it was it was a very early version, and there wasn't as much resources to help learn how to use it. And I gotta say, I wasn't a very good programmer coming out of university, so I didn't even know really where to begin learning it. Plus, I didn't know C# very well, so I was just completely out of my depth there. Really, I learned most of my programming expertise, knowledge. I would say I became a completely different programmer once I landed my first job, and that was not at a games company. That was actually at a technology company. Tech company? I don't know if you'd call them a tech company. They would call themselves a little bit of a tech company, I suppose. But yeah, really, on-the-job learning was probably 99% of what made me good at coding and what developed my career. I think my point was that I'm a bit jealous of all the resources that current students leaving university have at their disposal. If I had that, I think I would have done some pretty different things. Actually, thinking about how bad of a coder, I wouldn't have done anything different. I would have sucked, and I would have sucked just at the same time as making a games project. What's not good about games universities? Well, if you're going into a university course expecting somebody to hold your hand, it's going to be hard for you because nobody's there to do that, and it's really not how universities work. It's not like high school where anyone really has any stake in you passing that at all. In university, you're paying, it's really up to you to learn it, and sometimes your teachers are just going to, frankly, you won't necessarily be their priority if they also hold down a day job at a games development company, which would be a sign of a good teacher to be learning from. They may not have the time to dedicate to making sure every student is doing all the work. And really, it isn't their job to make sure that you do the work. It's their job to facilitate you as best they can for you to learn it. And you learning it yourself is going to be probably one of the most critical skills that you learn from uni. So for that being the case, why should you go to uni? It's a good question. Another bad thing about going to university is actually really going to be a matter of your expectations, but when you go there, a lot of your creative input's going to be dictated by others. This actually doesn't change when you leave university and get a job unless you actually work for yourself, but much of the time you're going to be working in groups. Your opinion of what's good will not be the only opinion of what's going to be good, and a lot of the constraints that are going to be put on you may be put on in a way that feels really arbitrary, because it's going to just be the constraints that they want to apply for the course so that you can learn whatever it is that you need to learn in that class. That's something that I think you should just be aware of going into these types of courses. It's not going to be always a happy fun time where all your ideas get listened to. In fact, almost none of the time will it be that way. The other bad thing that I've spoken about at length already is you're going to come out of the other end of university with an enormous debt. Now, even if you study in Australia, you're going to have a big debt, and you just have to factor that into your expectations of what's going to happen once you leave university. Really, I think if you're in a situation where that debt is going to be hanging over you and you need to pay it back straight away, it might actually put you in a disadvantaged position to really succeed at what you're trying to do, and that's probably to work at a games company. Because if you need to go back to just find any job to start paying back on that debt, you're really not going to be spending very much time keeping your skills honed and relevant to what an employer is going to look for to hire as a prospective graduate. So you need to be aware of that, and I definitely would not enter into any situation where you're going to not be able to realistically service that debt once you leave university. Like I said, in Australia, this is a bit of a different case, and some other countries, all different countries have different ways of handling university-based debts. But what I would say is, I mean, if you're going to come out of the other side with an $80,000 debt, you might as well just take money that you have now and put it into, you could put $80,000 into a computer and the courses that you think you might need, and dedicate yourself to learning it yourself if you can do that. Like, bearing in mind, spending that money is not going to be the bit that actually educates you. It's going to be you dedicating to it and learning it and actually stepping through the learning milestones, not just spending $80,000. So that's something for you to think about before you go down this road. And I definitely wouldn't enter into some sort of situation where you've put yourself at a financial disadvantage that you can't manage at the end of all of that, just based on the gamble that you will get the games job that you dream of. The last thing that I would say that is not good about studying game development at university is that you will not necessarily get the skills that you need to transfer to a normal, typical software engineering job. Now, I say that having done that. I studied games at university where we learned C++, we learned really all the things that you need to know about 3D or even building a game engine. Okay, maybe not all the things you need to know because there's a lot about that, but those were the skills that we learned in that class. But then the games industry happened to crash in Australia in 2010, the year that I graduated, and there weren't any games jobs to be had. And that was a big problem for a lot of people, especially the programmers. But almost all of the programmers could transfer into different software engineering degrees. But I would say in my case, I was not really well prepared for any of the jobs that I could transfer into. I did, in fact, most of us did, but you aren't going to learn the practical things about web development that you would need to know in order to be good at that. That, I would say, is something that has been a challenge in my career since then. Not having, say, web development skills when they pop up, not having really one of the earliest skills that I felt I was lacking in was databases. I just hadn't really been introduced to them because they are not very commonly relevant in game development. They are in their own ways and they do exist in their own ways, but at least in the Australian companies where there was lecturers teaching us here, you wouldn't get taught how to use a typical SQL or NoSQL, NoSQL, whatever. You wouldn't get taught to use these types of databases and tools for a game development course. Really, that stuff is more specialized to other types of software development. Then there's also just the languages, though that crosses over more now with Unity, but we learned C++ and C# and .NET languages like VB.NET were far more typical at the job that I landed. So you kind of end up not knowing really any of the most relevant stuff from other software engineering fields. So that's a reason that you might want to go towards those types of classes or some kind of hybrid class where you could touch on game development and do a little bit of game development, but you'll have kind of a diversified skill set. So if you're already going, or you just are gonna go, you've decided from what I've said now that it is for you, there's a couple attitudes that I would tell you to prime yourself with before you go in. If you're going to go into game development, you've decided from what I've said that you think it is for you, that you do think you want to try it, and I would encourage you to try it, because if you don't try it, you may never know. There is two fundamental attitudes I would have going into it. Number one is that you need to spend the first 6 months, first semester, or however your course is split up, really considering whether the types of skills that you're learning, whether you can see yourself doing that skill as a job every day for the rest of a meaningful career. So you need to look at programming and decide, do I even like programming? That's a really valuable thing to know. Or look at 3D art that way and decide, like, if somebody asks you to draw like a meadow with trees in it, or to 3D model like a gremlin or something like that, if you would actually be interested in that challenge enough to do it every day of your life, because that's actually why you're studying this. There is cool things about working in games, but really it's not any different from a job. And deciding 6 months in that you just don't see yourself doing that kind of job, maybe you're more attracted to like physical kinds of work, or other types of technical work, just make sure you don't trick yourself into believing that not liking it is a failure, because nobody's going to take away the enjoyment of playing games from you. However, getting a games job might actually do that a little bit for you, because you are around them so much and you can't look at them the same way. So be really realistic with yourself. Forget the glamorized version of what a game development job might seem like in your head, and think about the practical, raw experience of doing the work, and whether you actually think you enjoy that enough to make a career out of that. I would tell you to not forget, like, people who are your friends will not necessarily never be your friends again, but don't get too attached to the friendships and the things that you make there, because a lot of those people will drop out as well. The second thing that I'll say to you is that you should really keep in mind that studying the game development course is not going to be a guaranteed path to get into a game development job. It is a well-treaded path. It can work and does work. I mean, it worked for me, so I can't tell you that it doesn't work, and it worked for a lot of people that I know, but it also didn't work for a lot of people that I know, and nobody's going to just hand you a job or hand you a position. Like, there isn't any position waiting in a games company for you to finish your university course. These things come up and they are looking for a person that fits with their culture, that they can talk to and communicate with, that they feel like they can work with, and that can work productively and achieve the things that they ask them to, that might be you, or it might be really anyone. So, the job is not out there just waiting for you to get educated. But if you are educated, you may be a good fit for these places, and you can educate yourself these days. So say you've listened to this and you've decided, okay, maybe I don't want to do university, or you're still on the fence about it. What I'd say that you should do then is consider exploring this as a hobby. You can get on any kind of learning website like Skillshare, Udemy, LinkedIn Learning, and there's a lot of great courses on those sites that can teach you a really good taste right away. So you could spend a very small amount of money and, a good chunk of time, but not any less than you're going to spend doing a university course, and you can get a thorough taste of what's involved in assembling a game using code, using Unity or something like that. Or you can go to a website that does 3D training, and you could learn how to 3D model in Blender, which is totally free, or you could get an inexpensive thing like Maya has an inexpensive version, Maya LT or something like that. And, you could spend, under $100 to get a course and a subscription to Maya, and you could go start learning how to do 3D right away. And you'll get introduced really fundamentally similar to how a university is going to train you. So if you're not sure about whether you'd even like doing it, I would encourage you to start there. You still have time. You can easily put in 10 hours in a week to go all the way through a tutorial series and decide if you like it as a skill or as an activity. And that's going to give you a bit of insight into whether you should even try to approach a university course. So with that, I'm just going to leave it here. Thanks for watching. I'm thinking of getting into a bit more diverse videos just to introduce you to more facets of my life. So if you're interested in maybe seeing things that are a little bit more about me and less about games development specifically, let me know. If you think that you are interested in my opinions about games rather than game development, maybe comment that down below as well. And if you have any questions or you want to start a conversation, feel free to comment. If you like this video or you think it's relevant to somebody else, I guess like or share it, however it seems appropriate. And if you want to stay in contact, or you want to stay up to date with other kinds of videos like this, hit subscribe. I'll be back. I'll be doing more. I've recently got a brand new camera. I'm extremely proud of it. Hopefully I'll look a lot better and stay in focus a bit more. And I'll be working on improving the quality of these videos for you in the future. So thanks very much for sticking around and listening. Go do whatever you were about to do, whether it was make games or play them. So have fun. Peace. Such a YouTuber thing to say, peace. All right. That was good.